Welcome to the Fantasy Thinker. I'm Jerry Kodamich. Today I wanted to talk about the unreliable narrator, the concept of the unreliable narrator. And I wanted to talk about it in relation to epic fantasy that we all love and correlate that with actual history. And so the unreliable narrator has been a concept that's been around for quite a long time in fantasy literature. Some of the more famous examples would be Gene Wolfe's A Book of the New Sun. From what I've heard, I haven't read those yet, but I want to get to those. But also you have some of the more obvious examples like the character point of views in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire for each chapter. Before he did that, Stephen Donaldson did that in the Gap series, which the first book, The Real Story, was unreliable in the fact that it was such a small part of the actual story. And so Steve Donaldson really tackled that to full extent. And then we have, of course, Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, which is the whole thing is based upon an unreliable narrator. And we also, a more recent read for me, but it's been around for a while. We have Curse of the Mythwraith, Curse of the Mystery, the first book in the Wars of Light and Shadow series. So I'll talk about those last two a bit more later. But what I'm reading right now, to correlate this point with history, is I'm reading this book called The Earth Transformed, An Untold History by Peter Frankopan. And in the beginning here, not in the beginning, but in or near the beginning of this book, it's actually not near the beginning, it's a little at the page 100 here. He's talking about the period in written history that takes place about 1500 BC or so, and he's talking about the some of the written works at that time that occurred during the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, an ancient empire long before Babylon, but Babylonian Empire. Yeah, say that fast, Babylonian. And so the excerpt from this translated text is that during this collapse and this uprising by the wider population, um, you know, the previously the wealthy had been and the well-connected had been extremely successful in winning privileges, tax exemptions, land grants from the crown. It's kind of like today. And so this writer says those who had been rich now gasped for water. And this was the admonitions of Ipuwer. I'll put that on the screen. And while those who had begged for dregs now had overflowing bowls, those who had no food now owned barns filled with goods. Enslaved people now became enslavers. The old order, in other words, had been overthrown. And the writer of this book says this is what these sources seem to suggest anyways. Whether they are reliable, however, is another matter. And so he says the purpose of the inscriptions in this tomb is to underline that he was was his Antifi's tomb, yeah, is to underline that he was a savior, bringing hope, comfort, and relief to the people, as well as restoring stability to his own province. So basically, this guy was writing about the collapse, and then he was writing about this savior guy who restored order. And it's an inscription on the tomb, and thus, of course, whoever's if this guy did good in the eyes of the guy writing the stuff, then the inscription on the tomb would be something that reflects well on the guy he thought did good. Whether or not he actually did good, whether or not he only did good for some people and not others, that's a whole nother thing up for conjecture, because there's really not enough material from 1500 BC to actually put the whole story together, the real story, if you will. And so, for this book is good at pointing stuff out like that. A good historian will always question his sources, as we all know. And so he also points out that for rulers um, in history, throughout history, uh, rulers would, assuming responsibility for good outcomes in the natural world, served as a powerful claim to be the conduit between heaven and earth. And so a lot of rulers in history would put that on to themselves. Look, everything's good. I'm speaking to the gods are answering, everything's good. Of course, that is completely unreliable narration on their part. Um, and so further on, we also have um, the history of people writing history of their times in relation to nomads who would wander around. People in civilized areas would write about them. They would write about mobile pastoralists in whatever period, in whatever region or continent, invariably described these nomads as barbaric and chaotic. They claimed that they looked like monkeys, did not revere the gods, dig up truffle in the foothills, and eat raw flesh. And this was like from the Sumerian times. So that, of course, could not be taken as actual history today. It's very unreliable. But that is something that was recorded and could have been read by other people down the line without being any of the wiser, and would take it at face value. So, uh, so there's tons of unreliability with narrators in our actual history. Another thing that played a part in unreliability of narration was like the localization of the historical context. And that localization would play a part in unreliability because it's a narrow viewpoint of only what's going on around the person recording that history. Um, so, other historians have pointed these things out in other books that I've read too, but this is the most recent one um, that really nailed that point home. And so back to The Wars of Light and Shadow, Volume 1. Janie Wirtz does us the favor of pointing out right in the first page, the prologue, that let each who reads determine the good and the evil for himself. So she's telling us right off the bat that, yeah, this is a story. I'm giving you this story, but it's up to you to determine for yourself what the good or the evil is. And in that way, the narration of the story, depending upon whose viewpoint it could be, um, would have to be interpreted to the reader's own uh, their own interpretation as to the good or the evil of the characters in the story. And it goes back and forth. You have this story is about two half brothers, and it goes back and forth a little bit. I think for the most part, you think one brother's the worst of the two, but there's been other points in the book, and I'm only in the second book so far, that you get a different viewpoint, and so you have to make up your own mind. And so you have to also determine who where the points of view are coming from and who's narrating that certain section of the story. Janie Worst does a great job of keeping the narrators of those stories switching and very subtle, and telling the stories as it is, but also um, having a subtle shift of point of view between the characters in there. And of course, then Erickson, uh, which this whole series, this whole 10-book series, really emphasizes the unreliable narrator concept. And he does it right in, it's not even a prologue, it's just an opening statement of sorts. Yeah. That doesn't even have a page number in the opening book, Gardens of the Moon here. And this is before the prologue, after all the dramatis personae and stuff. It says the final words. Let's see. The final 3 lines in this one. I'll read the whole thing. All right. Now these ashes have grown cold. We open the old book. These oil-stained pages recount the tales of the fallen. A frayed empire, words without warmth. The hearth has ebbed, its gleam in life's sparks are but memories against dimming eyes. What cast my mind, what hue my thoughts, as I opened the book of the fallen, and breathed deep the scent of history. Listen then to these words carried on that breath. Really listen. These tales are the tales of us all, again, yet again. We are history relived, and that is all. Without end, that is all. So that right there, that little section tells you that you're opening a book that somebody wrote. Somebody is recounting these tales in here. And if somebody's recounting these tales, that means that somebody is a narrator. And is that narrator reliable? As you breathe deep the scent of history, as as we pointed out in the actual history book of our history that I noted earlier, a lot of our histories written at the time they were written can be quite unreliable. Um, and so we we are history relived, and that is all. Uh, yes, love that. So that is my little take on unreliable narrators. I could be completely wrong about everything here, so uh, take that reliability as you will. Take that from this possibly unreliable narrator. All right. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe below, and be good to each other.